In this video we look at another couple of topics covered in the Week 1 study guide. So you may have come across the term DBMS before. In the study guide and in the videos that you've watched so far, we've used the term database engine more than once. And when you've heard that term, you may have been thinking, well, shouldn't that have been DBMS? Shouldn't Mike have been saying database management system? And the answer is no. Database management system and a database engine are two different things. When you buy a database management system, one of the software components you get with that database management system is a database engine. But with a DBMS, you also get at least one tool that you can use to create and manage databases. So when you buy Microsoft Access, the product, you are buying a DBMS because you have a tool that you can use to create and manage databases, and you also get a database engine. So with Microsoft Access, the product, you get a little database engine called the JET database engine. But Microsoft Access, this program here that you see running here, that program is msaccess.exe. You see it executing here. Now that is what most people think of as Microsoft Access. But this program, this GUI development tool, can be used with the JET database engine and other database engines, and in particular it works well with Microsoft Server DBMS SQL Server. So when you buy Microsoft Access, it's a DBMS. You get the JET database engine provided, and you get msaccess.exe, which is a development tool for creating and managing databases. Now, msaccess.exe is more than just a tool to help create and manage databases. It's also an application development tool, and we'll be using it in that capacity for Assignment 1. So for Assignment 1, you'll be asked to develop a form and report using Microsoft Access, or at least using msaccess.exe. Now, the JET database engine, it's a little database engine, and if you look at the task manager, you won't actually see the JET database engine running here as a separate process. So it's run in process, but it is a piece of software, and it's a little database engine. So we've got this diagram here in the study guide that tries to represent you working on a computer. Looks like it's a desktop computer. You're running msaccess.exe. It's talking to the JET engine. So here you are developing your SQL query. You're submitting it to the JET engine. The JET engine is then reading data from the KWare database by reading pages from the disk on which the KWare database resides. There's a link in the study guide to a Wikipedia page talking about the JET database engine. You can learn a little bit more about that. And next week I'll do a quick demonstration of using msaccess.exe, the program that most people think of as Microsoft Access. We'll see it used in combination with SQL Server. So why do we use Microsoft Access in database use and design? Well, the answer is because it's widely available and because it does a reasonable job of providing an introduction to databases. We have said that if you are on a trajectory path that's going to take you to employment as an IT professional, we would encourage you to have a go at least one other DBMS in this course. So we'd encourage you to have a go at SQL Server or MySQL, and we'll provide some support for those two server DBMS. Of course, probably the most well-known server DBMS is Oracle. Oracle is a very mature server DBMS, supports massive applications, tends to be pretty expensive to buy, and as you can see from IT Jobs Watch, Oracle professionals are typically more expensive to employ than SQL Server professionals. So you can see here that Oracle is down the rankings from SQL Server in the IT Jobs Watch rankings. If you have a look at the salaries for job ads that mention SQL Server, the average salary is 40,000, whereas it's up to 48,000 for Oracle. Interestingly, although there's a great deal of interest in MySQL as a DBMS, and it's certainly grown in popularity over the last 10 years, at the moment the suggestion from IT Jobs Watch is that popularity is actually falling away a bit based on current job ads in comparison with those of 12 months ago. So that's DBMS and database engines. Hope that made sense. Now the other topic we want to mention in this video is the topic of metadata. So what is metadata? Well, metadata is data that describes other data. So we say that relational databases are all self-describing. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that the database holds a description of itself. So the basic idea is shown here. So the idea is that in the KWare database you will find that you have more than 4 tables. There are additional tables which are used as which form a part of that database. And here we see the representation of 2 of those other tables that may appear in the database. Now this is a very simple representation of metadata. In practice, sometimes the metadata, the table names are not quite so simple, the column names are not quite so obvious, it's not quite so easy to make sense of what's actually stored in the metadata. But this is the basic idea. The idea is that the database engine, or the database itself, will actually hold these additional tables. So the idea is there'll be an additional table called table, the table. Why would you call it that? Well, typically the name of the table indicates what it is that a single row in the table describes. So in the customer table, each row in the table describes a customer. Each row in the table, that is the table called table, stay with me here people, each row in the table describes a table in the database. So here we see 6 rows telling us that the KWare database has 4 tables that were created by Mike. The product table, customer table, sales order and sales order product tables. But there are another 2 tables in the database. One called table singular, I'll have to edit that before I publish this, and one called column singular, the table and the column table. The table describes the tables in the database. The column table describes columns in the database. Let's have a look at that. So all of these rows, first of all, let's just recognize that what we're saying is each row in the column table describes a column in a table in the database. So the first row here describes a column with the name PID, and it's a column that appears in a table with a table ID of 1. What is that table? Back up here, the table with a table ID of 1 is the product table. So we're saying here, this row says that there is a column in the product table with the name of PID, and it's got these other details here. So all of these rows in the column table describe columns in the product table. They've all got a table ID of 1. These rows in the column table describe 2 columns in a table with a table ID of 2. That's the customer table. Hopefully that makes sense. So the idea is that you'd have a table in the database called table, where each row describes a table in the database, and you'd have a table in the database called column, where each row in the table describes a column in the database. Now, what is the purpose of these tables? Well, the one use for these tables is that the database engine can use these tables to check that an SQL query that you submit for execution is valid. So in the from clause, when you say I'm interested in these columns from this table, it can use the data in this table to check whether or not the table you've mentioned is a valid table name. And when you say I'm interested in these columns, it can check this table to check that the column names you've mentioned are valid column names in that table. So these tables can be used to validate a query, but they have other uses as well. For example, hop back to msaccess.exe, and it's difficult to not call this program Microsoft Access, and see in fact at the top here it says, look, I'm Microsoft Access, here I am. So back here in msaccess.exe, in Microsoft Access, we're seeing a list of the tables in this database. So the question is, well, how does msaccess.exe discover what the tables are in that database file? And the answer is, well, it can look at these system tables, the table, to find out what the tables are in that database. And likewise with queries. So, and just another example, when I say create query design, I get this little dialog comes up and says, oh, what table are you interested in? So this is how the metadata is used. It's used by development tools to reach into the database to find out what is held in the database, what are the tables, what are the columns in those tables, which makes the development tools easier to use, because we can present lists of tables and lists of columns to make life easier for the developer. Make sense? So, relational databases are self-describing. They hold a description of themselves. They hold a collection of these system tables or metadata tables. Now, in Microsoft Access, you can see these system tables if you go. I selected right-click there on this this object here, which has a name which eludes me at the moment. Maybe the navigation pane, something like that, I think. So we go navigation options, and if we go show system objects, then you'll see a collection of additional tables appearing in the list here. And if you open up this table, the sysobjects, msysobjects table, at the bottom you'll start to see some stuff that sort of makes sense. Let's have a look, come across here. So here is a row that describes the fact that there is a table called customer. Here is a row describing the fact that the database holds a table called product, sales order product, and so on. Also we'll find a couple of rows in here that say there's a couple of queries in the database as well. So so what we're seeing here is data that's similar to what I showed you in my table. Now this table has a more obscure name, so it's msysobjects table, and it's got a lot of other data which is a little bit scary. But you can see the basic idea. So databases hold additional tables, system tables, which are used to describe what is in the database. So that's metadata. And now whenever you use a development tool and it gives you lists of tables and columns, you'll know what's going on, you know where it's getting that data from. A couple of little exercises for you to think about, and that's metadata. Data that describes other data. Hope that made sense.